I thought he was the kind of man people wrote stories about, the kind of man who walked into a room and made the air change, like the temperature had shifted just enough for everyone to notice, but no one could quite explain why. The first time I saw him, he was leaning casually against the bar of a crowded rooftop lounge, city lights glowing behind him like a carefully arranged backdrop. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He didn't have to be. There was a quiet confidence in the way he moved, the way he watched people, the way he smiled like he already knew something no one else did. I remember thinking that he looked dangerous, not in a threatening way, but in the way that certain people carry a kind of gravity around them, the kind that pulls you in even when your instincts tell you to keep your distance. Our eyes met across the room, and instead of looking away like a normal person would, he just kept looking. Not rudely, not arrogantly, just with this curious, slightly amused expression, like he had already decided something about me and was waiting to see if I would realize it. I should have walked away right then. But I didn't. If you enjoy intense relationship stories filled with dark romance, unexpected twists, and awkwardly funny moments, make sure to subscribe because stories like this tend to get even more chaotic as they unfold. When he finally approached me, he didn't open with a cheesy line or a rehearsed compliment. Instead, he glanced at the drink in my hand and said, "You ordered that hoping it would make you look mysterious, didn't you?" I stared at him. "Excuse me?" He smiled slightly. "It's working, by the way." That was the first moment I laughed. And unfortunately, it wasn't the last. His name was Adrian. At least that's what he told me. And from the moment we started talking, something about the conversation felt unusually effortless. He was funny in a dry, sarcastic way that caught me off guard. One minute, he would be teasing me about my music taste, and the next minute, he'd be asking strangely thoughtful questions about my life, my ambitions, the kind of future I imagined for myself. It felt less like flirting and more like verbal chess, except he seemed to be 3 moves ahead at all times. At one point, he leaned closer and said quietly, "You're overthinking every sentence before you say it." I blinked. "No, I'm not." He raised an eyebrow. "Okay, maybe a little," I admitted. "Relax," he said. "I'm not grading you." By the end of the night, we had talked for nearly 2 hours. 2 hours that somehow felt like 20 minutes. And when he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. Looking back now, that might have been the first red flag. Not because giving someone your number is a big deal, but because something about him felt rehearsed, not fake, just practiced. Like he had done this before. Many times. But in the moment, all I could think about was how alive the conversation had felt. Our first date happened 2 days later. He chose a small restaurant with dim lighting and quiet music, the kind of place where conversations naturally become more personal. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at the table like he had been waiting for a while. "You're early," I said. "I like being early," he replied. "It gives me time to watch people." That sounds slightly creepy. Only slightly? I laughed again. And just like that, the night slipped into the same easy rhythm as our first conversation. Dinner turned into a walk through the quiet streets nearby. The city felt calmer after midnight, like it was finally exhaling after a long day. At one point, we passed a group of street musicians playing an upbeat song, and Adrian suddenly grabbed my hand and spun me into a ridiculous, completely uncoordinated dance in the middle of the sidewalk. I nearly tripped over my own feet. "This is a terrible idea," I said, laughing. "Yes," he agreed, "but it's memorable." He wasn't wrong. That was the thing about him. Every moment around him felt slightly unpredictable, slightly chaotic, but somehow exciting at the same time. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just for late-night walks and long conversations, sometimes for quiet evenings at his apartment, where we would sit on the couch arguing about movies or music while the city lights flickered outside the windows. He was attentive in a way that made you feel noticed, but he was also inconsistent. There were nights when he was completely present, focused entirely on me, like the rest of the world didn't exist. And then there were days when he disappeared. No messages, no explanation, just silence. The first time it happened, I assumed he was busy. The second time, I joked about it. "Do you vanish like this often?" I asked one evening when he finally reappeared. "Only when necessary," he said lightly. "That sounds suspicious." "Or mysterious," he corrected. I rolled my eyes, but the answer stuck, in the back of my mind. Because the truth was, Adrian had a life I didn't fully understand. He talked about work in vague terms. He traveled occasionally, but never explained exactly why. And whenever I asked detailed questions, he would deflect with humor or change the subject. At first, it seemed charming. Then it became strange. And eventually, it became impossible to ignore. But the thing about attraction is that it has a way of convincing you to overlook the pieces that don't quite fit. Especially when the person standing in front of you feels like the beginning of something exciting. And for a while, that's exactly what Adrian felt like. The beginning of something unforgettable. I just didn't realize yet that unforgettable doesn't always mean good, because the day I discovered his other life was also the day everything I thought I knew about him collapsed in the most unexpected, awkwardly hilarious way imaginable. The day I discovered his other life started like any other day. That was the strange part about it. There was nothing dramatic about the beginning. No thunderstorm outside. No ominous feeling in the air. It was just a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind that usually drifts by slowly while you pretend to be productive, but mostly just scroll through your phone and drink too much coffee. Adrian had texted me the night before. "Busy tomorrow," the message read. "Work thing." That was typical for him. His mysterious work things appeared randomly in his schedule like uninvited guests. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned it. But that morning, something strange happened. I realized he had accidentally left his jacket at my apartment the previous night. And in the pocket was his wallet. Which meant one very simple thing. He would eventually need it back. So I decided to surprise him. Not in a dramatic romantic movie kind of way. Just a simple drop by, return the wallet, maybe steal a few minutes of his time. His apartment building wasn't far from where I lived anyway. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, it's funny how life sets up moments like that. Moments that seem completely harmless until they suddenly become the turning point of everything. When I reached his building, the doorman recognized me immediately. That wasn't unusual. I had visited enough times. "Afternoon," he said with a polite nod. "Hey," I smiled. "Is Adrian home?" The doorman hesitated. It was a tiny pause. So small most people wouldn't notice it. But I did, because something about the expression on his face shifted slightly. "You mean Mr. Carter?" he asked. I blinked. "Yes, Adrian Carter." Another pause. Then he said something that made my brain stall for a moment. "Oh, he's upstairs. His wife arrived earlier, though." I stared at him. "My what?" The doorman frowned slightly. "His wife." For a moment, I thought maybe my brain had misheard the sentence. Maybe the lobby noise had scrambled the words. But the doorman was already gesturing toward the elevator like nothing unusual had happened. And that was when the full meaning of the sentence finally landed in my head. His wife. My stomach dropped. Now, there are many ways people react when they hear something shocking. Some people cry. Some people get angry. Me? Apparently, I become extremely calm. "Right," I said slowly. Then I walked toward the elevator. I don't know what I expected to happen when I reached his apartment door. Maybe I expected silence. Maybe I expected him to open the door alone and explain everything with that confident half smile he always used. What I did not expect was to hear laughter inside the apartment. Female laughter, and Adrian's voice. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly open, which meant the conversation inside drifted clearly into the hallway. "You're unbelievable," a woman's voice said between laughs. That's what you married, Adrian replied casually. Married. There it was again. That word. And for some reason, instead of storming inside like a dramatic movie scene, I just stood there listening. Because part of me still expected some kind of explanation, some strange misunderstanding. But the conversation that followed erased that hope very quickly. You disappear for days sometimes, the woman said. Work, Adrian replied. You always say that. Because it's true. And the phone thing? What phone thing? The one where you keep your second phone hidden like you're a spy. Silence. Then Adrian laughed, a slow, amused laugh. You worry too much. At that point, my brain made a very simple decision. Enough listening. I pushed the door open. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Adrian was standing in the living room, and sitting on the couch next to him was a woman who looked extremely comfortable in that apartment. Comfortable in the way someone looks when they live there. Both of them turned toward me at the same time. The expression on Adrian's face was fascinating. For the first time since I had met him, he looked genuinely surprised. Not panicked, not guilty, just surprised. Well, he said slowly, that's unexpected. I held up his wallet. You forgot this. The woman on the couch looked between us. Adrian, who is this? There was a long pause. Adrian looked at me, then at her, then back at me again. And instead of panicking, he smiled, which honestly made the situation even more ridiculous. This, he said calmly, is a misunderstanding. I crossed my arms. Fantastic. I love misunderstandings. The woman stood up now. Adrian. Yes? Explain. He rubbed the back of his neck like someone solving a mildly inconvenient puzzle. Okay, he said. Then he pointed at me. This is someone I've been seeing. The woman's eyes widened. I blinked. Someone you've been seeing? I repeated. That's the official title now? He shrugged slightly. It felt accurate. The woman stared at him like she was deciding whether to throw something at his head. You're cheating on me. Adrian sighed. Technically, yes. That was the moment everything became strangely funny. Not because cheating is funny, but because the level of honesty in his answer was so unexpected, it completely broke the tension. The woman looked at me, then back at him. Then she said something that made the entire situation even more absurd. You said you were terrible at relationships. I am, Adrian replied. Then why get married? He thought about that for a moment. Poor long-term planning. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The woman turned toward me. You think this is funny? No, I said quickly. Then I paused. Okay, maybe a little. Adrian looked between both of us like someone observing a social experiment. Well, he said, this is certainly not how I expected my afternoon to go. Really? I said. You thought juggling two lives would stay organized forever? He tilted his head. To be fair, it worked for quite a while. The woman grabbed her purse. I'm leaving. Understandable. Adrian nodded. She walked toward the door, then stopped beside me, looked me directly in the eyes, and said something I will never forget. Congratulations, she said. You can have him. Then she left. The door closed behind her. Silence filled the apartment. Adrian exhaled slowly. Well, he said. That escalated. I stared at him. You're unbelievable. I've heard that before. From your wife? Among others. I shook my head. Do you realize how insane this entire situation is? Yes, he said calmly. Are you worried about it? Not particularly. I stared at him like he had just grown a second head. How are you this relaxed? He shrugged. Because the truth was always going to come out eventually. You didn't think that was important to mention? He looked at me thoughtfully. You never asked if I was married. I opened my mouth. then closed it again. Technically, he wasn't wrong, and that somehow made the entire situation even more ridiculous. I grabbed his wallet and dropped it on the table. "Well," I said, "that was fun. You're leaving?" "Yes." He watched me walk toward the door. "Are you angry?" he asked. I stopped, thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. "Honestly? Yes. I think I'm mostly impressed by how chaotic your life is." He laughed quietly. "Fair." I opened the door, then looked back at him one last time. "You know what the weirdest part is?" I said. "What?" "I actually thought you might be the one." He leaned against the wall. "And now?" I smiled slightly. "Now I think you're someone else's problem." Then I walked out. And strangely enough, instead of heartbreak, all I felt was relief. Because sometimes the most powerful realization in a relationship isn't discovering that someone lied. It's discovering that you deserve something much better than the chaos they were offering. And if stories like this remind you how important it is to recognize red flags before they become disasters, make sure to subscribe for more dark romance stories, relationship twists, and storytelling that feels a little too real sometimes. Because trust me, some love stories don't end with happily ever after, but they do end with something better. Freedom.